What is going on, movie meals? Movie meals. We're here to talk Game of Thrones, a non-diversive topic. You know, no one hates this show. We're here to talk about the original Game of Thrones, and this is an honest conversation. I think it's time to have about Game of Thrones. So this will be very casual. No Kyle, he doesn't watch Game of Thrones. I've got notes, so apologize for reading. But I just rewatched it for the first time since season 8. I had really distanced myself from Thrones, which a lot of people have. I showed it to was rewatching it, showing it to somebody for the first time, and I wanted to get a good perspective as House of the Dragon was coming up on really what had happened with Game of Thrones. So I'm here to talk about my honest take of Game of Thrones, and I'm just going to go down these lists. It starts in season 7. And a lot of this is negatives I think people have talked about that I've had, and I'm curious to see how they go. So this, again, an honest conversation about Game of Thrones. So the very first comment I wrote down is just how much people hated that Arya did not fight the waif in the dark. And I remember when that came out that everybody was talking about how they were going to film it. Were they going to do night vision? What were they going to do? We were going to get this insane fight in the dark. This is a negative comment I stand by in season 7. I think it would have been awesome to see them have a real battle, not a chase in the street, to see how she defeats her. I think would have been great, and I think would have really helped how we get the Arya in season 7 or season 8, because I do think that Arya just suddenly she kind of comes back like the kid who went to Europe and didn't really do a lot, but then talks a big game about how they went to Europe. I feel like that's how Arya was really taken as a character. She just kind of showed up and she was like, "No, I am now a badass. Like I just am." And it's like, well, as an audience, we didn't see her do a lot of really. She gets her butt kicked the whole time and doesn't get what she wants. She does some cool training, but it would have been really cool to have seen her really fight and earn it. But that's my stance on that. Let's see what's next. People upset with Sansa not knowing that the 7 days thing. Now I have to even remember what that is. People upset that Sansa not knowing the 7 days thing. Um, I'm trying to remember what this is. I don't fully remember the 7 days thing. My notes clearly not good enough. I do think Sansa gets a bad rep in season 7 and 8. This is definitely a season 7 thing. Um, if I remember correctly, I believe this is referring to that Sansa was unaware how long time had passed, and people were like, "How does she not understand that?" And to me, that is the same as in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Spoiler for that, when he doesn't run around the lasers when he turns it off. And it's all by people who I watch do dumb stuff all the time, and it's part of fantasy and storytelling, and it just doesn't make sense. The comments from actors was my next note about how many of them have hated the way the show ended, and many of them have really defended it. Like I know Peter Dinklage has really defended it, saying that this is what they wrote. He's proud of it. He's proud of what he did. And to me, that does mean something. It doesn't mean everything. I think Amelia talking about how, kind of alluding to the fact that she doesn't love the way the show ended is very fair, and I think a good point. But I also think Peter Dinklage saying, "Hey, I really liked how my character ended and I really like the story," I also think is fair. And I think people to say, "Oh, well, he's an actor, he doesn't understand," is just wrong. I mean, he's going to know the character and this world better than any of us, outside of the actors and obviously George. So I think it's always good to take what actors say with a grain of salt. It made me think a lot of The Last Jedi with Luke when Mark Hamill was saying that he fundamentally disagreed. I take some of that into stock because he's going to know this world better, very well. But I also take some of that without a grain of salt because he's also not a writer. So I take the actor's comments. I know some people die on what Peter said. Some people are dying on what Amelia has said and other people, but I kind of disagree there. I think it's just you take both with a grain of salt and you have to make up your own mind. Let's see. The Sand Snakes, they suck in the show. Um, one of the things I noted is that I think, and this will come back, I think Dan and Dave, and I don't hear this talked about enough. I think Dan and Dave viewed major book characters. Oh, I did forgot to say that off the show. I've read the books now. That's part of the reason I wanted to do this rewatch. I wanted to be a book reader going in this time. I had not read the books when I had seen Game of Thrones prior, and I had watched it a couple times through before season 7 even aired. I had watched it, I think, twice through before season 7, and then one more full time through before season 8. So this would have been my fourth viewing, but now after having read the books. So I'm not here to get into a lot of the differences. I'm just here to talk about things that I've noticed and, again, have this honest conversation. But one of the things I have noticed is that the Sand Snakes, I think Dan and Dave viewed as big players because they assumed everybody had read the books. And they're not big players. They're wasted players. And I wish they had, not been wasted because they could have been really cool. They're a lot cooler in the books. And I think that comes into play with how deaths happen in the last two seasons, where I think a lot of the complaints are they should have killed off a major player. And I think to Dan and Dave, they did. I don't think they kept plot armor around. I think they said, look, these are big characters to us. We're going to kill them off. And it just ended up being players that are not very big. Same with the Tyrells were definitely major players. And I think they are pretty big deaths that don't get talked about enough. Let's see. Episode 6 of season 7 is magnificent. Episode 6, season 7, John has another moment with the Night King where he doesn't kill them, although the complaints and the plot armor are stupid, is what I wrote. And I agree to that. That's the Suicide Squad episode or the Magnificent 7 episode. I think that is a really fun episode. I think the complaints of how do they get there so fast? How do they do this? How do they do this? You clearly aren't paying attention in Game of Thrones. We never got a lot of we bounced around from character to character to character to character. And when the characters start to come together and they slowly start to die, you're gonna have to speed time up in a fantasy show. And I don't think that should be a valid complaint of the show. I remember people saying didn't see like Davos and John just show up on Dragonstone. Do you really need more conversations of them talking? To me, that's something that doesn't happen. I love the moment John has in season 7 with the Night King. I think it's kind of a fun little moment. Does Dany fly there pretty quick? Sure. She's on a dragon. They're not on a massive continent. They're I mean, it's big, but like, relax. It's not going to take forever. We've been on planes. I can get from here across the United States, which is bigger than the distance of what Westeros would be, in a day. So I think that's okay. I do think the complaints about plot armor, we didn't have big characters die. Again, Thoros, I think to the creators, is a big character. He's not a big character to the audience, but I think to Dan and Dave, that's why they went with it. Do we really need to lose certain people there? Maybe, but I really like the episode. I think it's fun. Already talked about Arya. Episode 8 is one I'm really cool with, and reveals a lot. But I do think some of the timing is off. Or excuse me, I have this all wrong. Season 8, episode 1, I think is a cool episode. I think the timing is off of this episode. I think a lot of what happens is off of this episode. Getting into season 8 now, and the horrific thing about season 8, this will be basically going through it step by step here. So episode 1, I think, works pretty well. I don't like that Sansa and Dany, they all just immediately, everybody just hates each other. And it feels honestly like a betrayal of characters. I don't really love how Dany acts as soon as she lands on Westeros. She acts very high and mighty, and it is a little bit of a betrayal of the Dany we've seen, because the Dany we've seen does have those moments of like, no, I'm the queen, but she does listen to people, and she doesn't do that as much in episode 1, but I do think it's an okay episode. I think season 2 low-key slaps. Season 2. I think episode 2 of season 8 low-key slaps. I think it is awesome. I think preparing for the long night is fantastic. I think these characters are going to merge in the books if they're alive. The characters are going to merge together. I think it slaps. I think it slaps. I love Brienne getting knighted. I love the way that they do things and set up and prepare the conversations that are had. I love it all. So now let's get in episode 3. I have a huge note here. So episode 3, the long night. Stylistically, I think it's great almost the whole time. Most of the time, I think it's great. The this is too dark argument, I think, is incredibly ridiculous. I think those are from people who have not been watching Game of Thrones from the start, and they haven't been paying attention to Game of Thrones from the start. I rewatched it. I have a great TV. I've got a great setup. I have my lights off. You can't see a lot during the Battle of Blackwater Bay. There's parts it's too dark, especially when they're on the ships. There are parts at the Battle of the Wall that are too dark. The only battles that are not too dark are Battle of the Bastards and Hardhome, I think. And I think if you rewatch it, you go, oh, it is hard to see at times. The whole point of the darkness is the point of the filmmaking. Sapochnik did a great job. That's what he wanted to do. And he's doing it based off the script. And yes, Dan and Dave, do they make bad scripts? Sure, they made some poor scripts. Did they not? First of all, Dan and Dave, you need to have hats off to them if you've loved the show even once, because it's hard to adapt a massive novel. It's hard. It's incredibly hard. And how they made season 3 and 4 as good as it is from one of the greatest novels of all time is a great achievement. And they are incredible writers because they're able to do that. Did they crap the bed when they didn't have all this material to base off of? Sure. I agree. I think that's fair. But it's also unfair, I think, to call them like these horrific writers that have always been horrible and they just stole. It is very hard to adapt big novels. It's hard to adapt small novels. Look at movies that are based off novels that have worked and have not worked. Divergent versus Harry Potter. Divergent versus Hunger Games, and even that struggles at the end. So back to the Too Dark thing. Sapochnik reads the script and he goes, all right, here's how I'm going to do it. And I think he does a great job with it. And he makes an amazing battle. I love the Arya stuff. I love, 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 love the Arya stuff. All right, here we go. The Too Dark. I got a huge paragraph for this episode. Melisandre showing up should have been more than what it was. I didn't love it and how she does it. Theon is a major death, and he has one of the best arcs in Game of Thrones. My brother Annie Essays talks about that on his channel. You should go check it out because he has a great video essay on it. Theon is awesome. People say no major deaths. Theon is one of the best characters in Game of Thrones, and rewatching it stands, and his death is fantastic. He has a great redemption arc and does a lot to earn what he does. He's one of the best written characters, and Dan and Dave, it's hats off to how they wrote him through season 8 because he did a great job when they lost material to the book. They stick to him as a great character, and you've got to give hats off where hats off are due. And they do an amazing job with Theon. I love his ending. I love his arc. He is a major death. People didn't love him, so they were happy to see his death. And then the complaint comes, where are the major deaths in episode 3 of season 8? Well, there were no major deaths. Plot armor, plot armor, plot armor. They chose Theon, and it's a great ending to Theon. I'm standing by it. He doesn't get enough love. Jorah 2, huge death. People don't like Jorah anymore by the time we get to season 8, so they complain. I wanted a character that I love to die. Ridiculous to me. Jorah's an awesome character. I think he has a great arc throughout the show. Jon doesn't get a face off. This sucks. This is horrific. They ruined Jon. Hats off and hats on for where wax on, wax off. You know what I'm saying? Jon gets destroyed in season 8, and I feel bad for Kit because I know how much Kit loves it. Jon doesn't get a face off with the Night King. This is stupid. Prophecies mean nothing. This means nothing, and I think Jon should have been there to at least fight. Now look, I'm okay with Arya killing the Night King. I love it. I think it's awesome. But Jon not getting to face off and just screams at a dragon is idiotic. Jon will face off in the books. Like it's going to happen. Jon should have faced off. Whether he's the rightful king or not, we have built up since season 1 for Jon to have at least fought. If Jon fights and Arya comes in at the last second when it looks like Jon's about to lose and Arya saves him, some fans who are just stans of Jon will get mad, but I think people would be a lot more into how that episode ended. This show didn't need to be 13 seasons. 8 isn't bad. It is poor writing. They didn't need 13 to 10 seasons, which everyone's talking about right now because HBO wanted it to happen and George wanted it to happen. And I got to say this, hats off to HBO for letting creators make their show. Because we look at something like The Walking Dead, and that didn't get to happen. And The Walking Dead for a while was incredible. Incredible. It was so good. And they said, no, this show's going to go on forever. And we're going to fire you if you think you're doing it not the way we want. That's what the studio said. HBO and WB didn't do that. They let them create it. And I think you have to give props to that. We hear that enough. Let creators make their show. They crap the bed. 100% true. But at least HBO let him, because HBO could have said, nope, we're going to fire you. We're going to fire you when you come to us with these 8 episodes. We don't like what these scripts we've read. I think they did like the scripts that they read, and it turned when the audience then didn't like it, then boom, we get what we get. But I think 8 seasons is okay, but maybe make the last 2 seasons full 10 episodes, drag some things out. As somebody who's studied film and studied screenwriting, I think they definitely could have made something else. I do think Dan and Dave wanted to go off and make Star Wars, and they quickly wrote something and was like, here we go. let's see, what else do I have here? Yeah, the poor writing's a problem. If you make great writing, you'll have a great show. 8 seasons is fine, but if they had succeeded in the expectations, people wouldn't be complaining that it's 8 seasons. The Night King raising the dead, I loved that moment in in episode 3. Uh I get that he cares about Bran, but I wish he still would have fought with Jon. Um I don't really see why the Night King has to be the one to kill him. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. He's got a horde of zombies with him. Um the show is built on switching up our expectations. Okay, here's the crypt part. Um I think is another thing that's unfair as a criticism. Where else are they going to put them? They're going to sit out there and fight these kids? Like, people, look, I watch my friends do the stupidest things all the time, and then I watch them say that, how do they not think that putting the men and the women in the crypt is a bad idea, the children and the women in the crypt, the people who can't fight in the crypt is a bad idea? Look, it doesn't happen until he raises his arms. He has a huge army. He only did that at the very end. If Jon doesn't show up to try and fight him, he's not even going to do that. He's just going to march in and take him out. So I think that's a little bit unfair of a criticism myself. Love the thing with Arya. It's an homage to Jurassic Park. I love what Arya does in that episode. I love it so much. Also, Beric Dondarrion dies. He's another major player. He's one of my favorite characters in Game of Thrones. I love that he gets going. The blurry effects are not done well. The shadows in episode 3 are. The shadows and the use of darkness is, I think, done very well. It's the blur effect that they do that is not done well. Dany's change over the course of the season is awful. Really, it's happened in season 7 and 8. I think it would have been better if they had flipped it. Maybe Dany was mad at first. I don't know what that note means really. Dany not surrendering is idiotic. It's so bad. It is not true to her character at all. Not at all in this final episode. And I think the final episodes have some cool moments, but like they've surrendered. You have dragons, fly them to the Red Keep, land on the Red Keep, find Cersei, and have Cersei do it. Hey, your army has won. There is no reason that she needs to be true to her whole point is she is destroying the wall. It doesn't make any, or the wheel. It doesn't make any sense. It is bad writing. Is it supposed to be, oh no, she's a Targaryen always. She's the daughter of the Mad King. Everybody's been saying it forever. The whole point of her character and why we sit through some bad things with Dany. Dany is boring in early seasons. She has boring arcs. She has some awesome arcs. She has some boring episodes. She's one of my least favorite characters when I'm rewatching. She's one of my favorite characters. She's one of my least favorite characters when I'm rewatching because I just don't care about what's going on in Essos as much as I care about what's going on with the Wall or with Rob. So it just, when this happens, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. It's a dumb plot device, and truly, I think if they had, even if she had just not done that, it would have worked. Like the Clegane Bowl is great. I wanted to see that. On the stairs is stupid. Arya doesn't need to be there at all. She's there so fans can be like, look, it's Arya. And they have a person to follow during another fog of war type thing, like in the Battle of the Bastards. It's stupid. Everything that happens after that is idiotic. Jon getting sent to the wall makes no sense. I'm all for Bran being the king. I think Bran being the king makes a ton of sense. I think it is very well done, and I think that's something George R. R. Martin said was going to happen. So that's another thing that we need to talk about here is George. I've had these theories since season 8 ended. There were many reports, and in interviews where George said, I've told Dan and Dave beat by beat what's going to happen in the story. We sat down, I believe they had dinner, and he told them what's going to happen for the rest of his books. I completely think that happened. Then there were two theories. Does he stick with it and it'll work better because it's expanded? It is time to flesh it out in the books. That I think is very possible and true. He's been saying he's heavily editing. I do think he saw some of the hate and he was like, all right, I got to change a few things. But I think some things work. I think Arya killing the Night King works. I think Bran being king works. I think Jon being sent to the wall makes no sense whatsoever. The wall doesn't exist anymore. It's literally shattered, and it's just so he can be with the wildlings. It's stupid and idiotic and doesn't make any sense. Jon should be the rightful king. The way Jon kills Dany is very forced and doesn't work. There's a lot that doesn't work, but this is my honest conversation, because the things that truly don't work really don't work. But there are a lot of things like the darkness in episode 3. I think killing the Night King 3 eps in can work. I just don't think it did work with then what happened later. I think the Night King should have been the biggest villain over Cersei. Um, I think some of the stuff just doesn't work. Some does, but I didn't hate it as much as I remember hating it. That's not true. I really hated it. But there are some things that I think are good, and there are some things that I think work very well, and I think some complaints are invalid, like the darkness, and things like that. But a lot of characters are taken poorly. This has really just been me rambling in my honest conversation, but that's what I wanted it to be anyway. So, guys, what do you think? Comment below. Let me know. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. As always, thanks for watching, Mom. Go get some of this merch. We're taking Christmas out. Halloween greater than Christmas. And as always, thanks for watching, Mom, and we'll see you next time, guys.